podcast is part of the Sports Social Podcast Network.
Andy Murray going the distance, Carlos Alcaraz defying the laws of physics, and Novak Djokovic is world number one. Who needs a whole podcast when things stay the same the more they change? This is Tennis Unfiltered.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
I'm James Gray of iNews.co.uk and the iNewspaper. Calvin is, of course, our resident tennis coach. George Belshaw is a shadow of the tennis writer he used to be, not least because he's just come back from a weekend in Ramsbottom.
Oh, yes, it was a glorious stag for my friend James. I've been very tired all day after a weekend of silliness that included going to watch Ramsbottom United versus Bootle in their director's box.
What? They have a director's box?
They have a director's box. It was the ninth tier of English football. Ramsbottom are firmly bottom of that league, and it was not a great game, I'll be honest. It was a very fun weekend. So, and obviously I'll extend my public congratulations to James for arranging a wedding and inviting me to the stag.
That is a huge mistake, as anyone knows. That's Eleanor Crook's territory, the Press Association's finest tennis correspondent, Ramsbottom. It's
very nice up there.
Calvin, I mean, it's a beautiful part of the world. There are few better Ramsbottoms in the world.
Yeah, maybe Barnsley. I mean, I actually once at a tennis tournament, I stayed, it was a British tour at Felixstowe, I think, and I stayed at the Travel Lodge in Clacton on a Wednesday night, Tuesday and Wednesday, and there was a hen do in the hotel in Clacton on a Tuesday night. And
wow.
I thought, interesting, to say the least.
That might be the proper. That's plumbing the depths. I also just realised that we have loads of American listeners who will think we've just made this place up. I assure you, Ramsbottom is an absolutely real place, just outside Bury, which is just outside Manchester, which is in the northwest of England. I mean, I'm not going to fully describe it, but there you go.
It also really highlighted how awful getting the train home on a Sunday can be. Because we had like a house rented out in Blackburn, just around there. It took me 75 minutes to get to Manchester from Blackburn.
Oh, God.
And then 6 hours in total to get back to London from there.
So that's supposed to be one of the faster routes as well, going Manchester to London.
Yeah. It was a bit unlucky because you had the kind of Sunday scheduling where everything's like coming once an hour. And because they're only coming once an hour, they're all the longest possible versions of the track. But yeah, it was a tough day. I'm not fully recovered, I'll be honest, James. So if I'm grumpily slagging people off on this podcast, I please do take it with a pinch of salt today.
It will be quite hard to tell from your normal grumpy slagging people off on this podcast. So we'll do our very best. Probably the best place to start this week, given everything that he's been through. And well, first of all, Andy Murray has pulled out of Dubai. The tournament called it a recurrence of a hip injury. People who know these things know that you have to say you're injured, usually. You can play the fatigue card, but they don't like it very much, and I think you can only do it a certain number of times a year. But Andy Murray pulled out Dubai. We're told by his team that he basically knackered, and there's only so much that his body will do these days. And that's because he went all the way to the final of the Qatar Open, where he was beaten by Daniil Medvedev, but on his way, he beat Lorenzo Sonego, Alexander Zverev, Alexandre Müller, and Yuri I'm really going to have to learn to say the Czech lad's name, but I think it's Lecheka. I think the H has a T in it somehow. Anyway, he beat all of them. Of course, they all went to 3 sets. Of course, they were basically all thrillers. George, what else do you expect of Andy Murray these days? It's just what he does, isn't it?
Yeah, it's been another topsy-turvy week. There were lots of matches that I was kind of watching like, oh, Murray's looking really good today. Like when he went 6-love up on Lehechka, and you're like, wow, this is, pretty impressive. This guy did really well at the Australian Open. And then it just turns into an absolute ding-dong that requires him saving 5 match points. Similarly, kind of the Zverev match. I mean, Zverev played much better in the second set than he had in the first. But, I do always come back to this with Murray. I just feel he can be winning matches much easier than he actually is. And then it kind of got to the final. Medvedev, someone we've spoken about a fair amount over the last few weeks about where exactly he is, was just a cut above him, to be honest. And whether that comes down to the fatigue of all the other ridiculous efforts he's had all week, or whether it's just kind of a fact of life that Medvedev is just a slightly better version of Murray these days. He's younger, gets to the balls really well, he hits it deep. So certainly no shame in that defeat, and you take a final as you come. I guess my main reflection for Murray now, though, is where is he in terms of where he's going? Is he just happy with these kind of dramatic victories? He does seem so pumped up whenever he's winning these type matches, and understandably so. But is that enough to keep him going? I mean, he's like 70th in the rankings now. What does he actually believe he's going to be achieving on this tour at this stage in his career? And, I think it's always really tough to stop these things. And when you're having highs like this week, he's probably not thinking like that. But I do just kind of wonder that we're seeing him win a lot of tight matches, and yet it's not really translating into anything in terms of the biggest prizes and where he's going next. But that's possibly a little bit harsh after what's ultimately been quite a good week for him.
Calvin, when you compare that run, beating Sonego, Zverev, Muller, Lehechka, as George correctly says, because I've just checked the ATP pronunciation guide, is that more impressive than, say, Stuttgart last year, which was the last time he made to the final, where he beat O'Connell, Bublik, Tsitsipas and Kyrgios? Does it suggest progress?
There's definitely progress. The concern is, I'm just looking now, I'm looking at his activity on the ATP site. He hasn't won a match that hasn't gone the distance since October. Gijon 250. First round, he beat Davidovich Fokina. Since then, every single match he's won has gone the distance. It's gone either 3 or 5 sets, depending what they're playing. He hasn't won a match in straight sets this year. And that's, I don't see how that's sustainable for anybody. Like no one else will have that record. But the problem is for me is that he's kind of always been like that. He's kind of always ended up, and I do wonder whether it's a little bit about, we always credit him and rightly so on this problem-solving ability that he has, and I wonder whether it's like almost now he needs a problem to solve. Whether he just can't just come in and just take the initiative in a match. It needs to be, because it's usually in most of those matches. I know he won the first set against Lehechka 6-love, but in most of those matches it involves him coming back from either a set down or a breakdown or something. So yeah, I mean, he's definitely, he's playing very well. There's no question of that. His actual tennis is very good. I think this week there was a definite improvement in him playing more positive. I saw some stats out yesterday that one of the data companies does, and it was about points won. They call it stealing and converting. So the points when you're on top in the points, what percentage of points you're winning. And I think a good percentage of that is 70%. And when you're on defense in the point, how many of those you're winning, which is, and I think 30%, above 30% of that is pretty good. I think in terms of that, he has to make his conversion better, because the number of times you see him on top in a rally, usually caused by a big first serve, which he has got a big first serve, and he just doesn't do enough damage after that.
You've touched on a really interesting question on Andy Murray's career there. What's the bloody word? Philosophical there, Calvin. Yeah, we've always called him a great problem solver, but is that just because he makes so many problems?
That's a lot of
problems. Like, actually thinking this through, like, if he was so good tactically and mentally, like, how often is he being that surprised by the player he's thinking against? Why not come up with a better game plan to start with and implement it? Maybe that's a little bit harsh and a bit tongue in cheek, but yeah, it's interesting.
This actually feeds into a question, and as you always know, if you want to ask a question, head to Twitter, Unfiltered Tennis, or email us, tennisunfiltered@gmail.com. Elena Surdi, who people will know, she's a regular listener and regular contributor. She says, inspired by the incredible feat of Andy Murray, what gets you through match points? Is it mostly technique, courage, tennis IQ, sheer luck and guesswork? Calvin Murray saved a couple of match points, I think 5 match points against Yuri Lehechka, and Elena has named you as the man she wants to answer this question. So what do you think? Is there such thing as a big point player?
Yes and no. We actually had a discussion in our WhatsApp group about this, didn't we? The other day, which was talking about how betting companies do their modelling on who they think is going to win tennis matches, and one of those things is a big point player. And what they basically were saying is that players don't play better on big points; they just play around about how they've been playing in general. So the percentage of points don't change. So I think that in that regard, is he a big point player? Yes, because he plays his normal points well. He plays the same as what he plays normally, which you would say he does. I think it was probably more in that circumstance you would say that Lehechka isn't a big point player, in that he kind of blew that. He definitely won. He lost 5 points in a row on his serve when he was serving for it. Was he 40 love up?
40-15, I think. But
40-15 was it? So he lost 4 points on his serve from serving for it, which wouldn't go in with his usual model, I don't think. So I'm not sort of being Captain Hindsight in that. I think I've said on the pod before. I think that when we talk about, there's this idea that certain players play better under pressure, and I don't believe that anybody does that. I think the best players just play their normal level under pressure, and some players play worse under pressure. I don't think it's feasible that anybody plays better under pressure. And Murray, I think, if you've got to close a match point out, he's not somebody who you'd ideally want to do that against, because he's going to make you hit a winner, and you're going to have to hit a good winner. And I think he knows that. Has he got the record now for most matches won from match point down?
Yes, because he equaled it. He equal it in Australia. So yeah, I guess he does
so
the record now.
He's basically the best ever. The best ever at saving match points and winning matches.
Yeah, there is. I mean, it probably needs a statistical deep dive to prove it, but it comes back to that same question of, well, doesn't he just get himself in that situation more often? And it's probably because he has quite like a game style that doesn't dominate matches. Like, he's never been someone to dominate matches because he doesn't have many enormous weapons. He's got good ball striking ability, but he's not like a John Isner or whatever who is going to be able to dominate matches in the same way. I would like to pick a better
should be, though.
John.
There's no reason why he shouldn't be, though, James. I mean, he's 6'2", 6'3". He's got a huge first serve. He can hit the ball. He's a great ball striker. Yeah. There's no reason why he shouldn't be. He just never really has been. And I think that is, for all his mental strength, and he's got huge mental strength, there has always been this sort of overriding concentration lapse thing about him at certain stages of matches where he's gonna set down, and even in his prime that would happen. You don't. Whereas Nadal, you see Nadal in early stages of slams tearing through 6-1, 6-2, 6-love, that kind of thing. And Federer, I guess, in his real prime would do the same. Djokovic, again, in his prime would. Murray's always been one. I remember one year he was like, not even this version of Adrian Mannarino, like one of the worst versions of Adrian Mannarino, is 2 sets to love down at the US Open. And this was when peak Murray, so one of the top 15 best players of all time, finds himself 2 sets to love down against a not very good version of Adrian Mannarino. Just wouldn't happen with any of the other top players.
In fairness, he then only lost 5 games, but yes, he eventually turned it on. I think one thing that's going to probably be worth keeping an eye on over the next couple of months and maybe years is Murray's second serve deep in tournaments, because one thing that happened to him in Australia when he was battling physically, just desperately trying to recover from that Kokonakis match, and I watched pretty much every ball he hit between that Kokonakis match and Bautista Agut, and there weren't many, and he was virtually unable to move, and the biggest problem was his lower back. And the way that really manifested itself was second serve, and it happened again in the Lehechka match. I thought there were moments when he just couldn't hit that second serve that he could really commit to, and so he was either hitting double faults or sort of just rolling it into the box. Now, Andy Murray's perfectly capable of winning matches rolling them into the box because he's a great baseliner, but I think what you're going to see as the knock-on effect from this, and it's all to do with the hip, it all comes back to it. I spoke to Bob Bryan in Australia, who of course had the same surgery and was someone Murray spoke to a lot about it. And he said, yeah, the way the lower back adjusts to it took the longest of all the bits of his body to adjust to having this metal hip. The lower back was the longest one. And I think going forward, you're going to look at Murray and that second serve late in tournaments, if he really wants to win tournaments or get to the semis of slams, that'll be the point that players in semi-finals of Grand Slams look at and go, right, I'm going to get all over second serve because it's clearly a huge weakness, and Murray will start going for it and start missing them. I think that's my concern.
I'm probably being really reductive here and very insulting, but I've always thought his second serve was quite crap anyway. And Calvin looks quite angry at me saying that, but it always felt like a little bit of a weakness for me. Like he does have a faster first serve than people often give him credit for at his best, but it always felt like the shot was a little bit safe in his locker and did often put him on the back foot, particularly early in matches, and potentially did contribute to some of the problems he did dig himself into. But as I say, I'm probably being a little bit blasé there.
No, I wouldn't disagree. I mean, on things what both of you said, I don't think James. I don't think for a second that he'll start going for it and missing them. He won't go. It's not in his nature to start going for it, and that's why that ties into what George says about his second serve not being great, and that's because he won't ever go for it. He's by his nature, he's a pragmatist, and his first objective is to put the second serve in the court. At his prime, at his best, when he was one of the best movers we've ever seen and the best defenders, it was always a bit of a paradox because it meant his second serve was pretty weak, which meant the other opponents could attack it. But then he always seemed most comfortable when he was on defense. And what you didn't want to do, unless you were one of the very best players around, was to be attacking Andy Murray. Because then if you were attacking him, it would probably mean you would come to the net at some stage. And that's where he wanted you most of the time. But he's not as good a mover as that now. I don't know if he can do that now. Yeah,
it's close. Calvin, I want to ask you about Lehechka because you had some very complimentary words to say about him in the chat. I mean, he's someone I think we all noticed at various different times. I noticed him play a couple of really good Davis Cup ties when they were in a group with Germany and Great Britain last year, and he's picked up quite a few decent victories now. He's 22 this year, so he's still only 21. Looks like a player.
I think he's a serious player, yeah. He just looks like one of those guys who's going to be coming into the top 15, top 10 at some stage in the next year, I would say. Year, 18 months, everything he's got. He's got weapons. He's got a good mindset. Doesn't look like he loses his head. He moves pretty well. No real weaknesses. He just looks like one of those guys who, you see coming through. You think, yeah, they're on the way into that top 10, and it's sort of little doubt about it, really. I think whether he translates that into Grand Slam finals and winning Grand Slams, I don't know. I need to see more, but I'm pretty certain he's going to be a top 10 player.
He's had one of those breakout slams as well, where you can't really say the draw opened up that nicely for him. He took out Chorich round 1, took out Norrie round 3, took out Felix round 4. Like, those are good, solid slam wins against good, players who've been in and around the top 10, 20 before. So, yeah, he's having a good season. I think I saw him on social media hitting with Thomas Burdick this week.
Yeah, I saw Steve Fraser out in Dubai.
And he's lost to Zverev today, though, so maybe this is a sign Zverev's back as well. He's starting to turn a corner.
Let's move on, shall we? What do you want to move to? Oh, well, Daniil Medvedev, I'm sorry. We've not really mentioned Daniil Medvedev, and we did talk about him last week, and I erroneously said that we shouldn't give him much credit for winning a 250 in Rotterdam when it was a 500. But it happens. He obviously won the title in Qatar and has now won 9 matches in a row since the Australian Open. I probably asked you this last week, George. Is he back?
Yeah, well, I mean, my theory is he's never gone his way quite as dramatically as other people feel he's gone away. The Felix match aside, they're all matches he should be winning pretty comfortably. I mean, with the greatest of respect to Liam Brody, Medvedev should be sweeping him off the court. Similar for Chris O'Connell, and he dropped a set there. So, this a good win over Felix, a good win over Murray in terms of straight sets, getting the job done. The big test is going to be where it goes though from here, and I think Dubai will be a decent marker for him, but it'll be a stronger draw, and then more importantly, it's where he goes in Miami and Indian Wells. But yeah, he seems pretty motivated to me at the moment. Seems like he's playing some pretty decent stuff again. I wasn't sure the fall was quite as bad as some would have made out, but I'm fairly confident for him. And he doesn't have many points to defend in this half of the year, which is quite useful for him in terms of building that momentum. And I wouldn't be that surprised if Medvedev did end the year as number 1 in terms of just having that bit more time on tour compared to last week. He's someone who feels to me like I don't see Novak ending the year as number 1 purely because I don't think he'll play as much. So I would see it being a two-way battle between Alcaraz and Medvedev if they both stay fit.
Yeah, because I think that's the thing as well. Medvedev, he's looked vulnerable in the early stages of slams recently, and a lot of that, I mean, and the chicken and egg there is you want to get your ranking up so that you can get an easier draw. The draws are rigged quite vigorously, so that the higher seed you are, the better bracketing you get. And he's now number 7 in the world, so that'll push him into the second bracket. Ideally, he'd want to get up as high as 4 to give him the best possible draw, barring 1, I suppose. I think it's interesting because we haven't had a slam with probably ever with Medvedev, Alcaraz, Nadal, and Djokovic in the latter stages. In fact, I know we haven't had that, and it's actually pretty rare that we've ever had the 4 of them in the same room at the same time, so to speak, when it comes to tournaments. We're not going to get that for quite a while because Djokovic almost certainly isn't going to play Indian Wells and Miami. We're then going to go to the clay, where I don't know how much we'll see Medvedev on the clay. I don't know how fit Alcaraz is. It's not Medvedev's best surface. Anyway, so I'm kind of thinking that we're going to go until Cincinnati or something, until we get all 4 of them in the same room. But anyway, go on, Calvin.
Do you think that's really the 4 now, though? Like, by the time it gets to Cincinnati, is Nadal going to be that much of a threat? I don't see it being. I think we might have one last push at him for the Roland Garros, but I wouldn't have him on the same level as the other 3 now, or anywhere other than Roland Garros, maybe somewhere else on the clay.
Which is a real disappointment, right? Like, because I would just want that one tournament with the 4 of them in the semis. It's not going to happen.
I mean, Zverev was the other one who was bang at that level last year before that injury. But
want that to happen. That's like there's also a bit of me which is like I want those specific 4 because they're also different. They've all got a kind of personality and a different type of one. Carlos Alcaraz has brought a whole different kind of dynamic to the whole thing. And speaking of Carlos Alcaraz, we really should note that he was beaten in the final in Rio de Janeiro last night, as it is. We're recording this on Monday evening, by Cam Norrie, who came back from a set down to beat him. It should be noted that Alcaraz did seem visibly hampered by a leg injury that he says he's been managing this whole time, but I'm going to put this in the category of what we described as the Djokovic hamstring injury, because he won 8 matches in a row and very nearly beat Cam Norrie in the final in Rio. So, however injured he was, he can't have been that injured. Calvin, we spoke when we kind of mapped out Cam's year that he was going to play as much tennis as possible, and I do believe he's now headed up to Acapulco for the tournament there, which would be his 3rd in 3 weeks, and obviously back onto the hard. You'll be delighted to know he's got Adrian Manarino in the first round, though, so that's basically a bye, right? I mean, Cam Norrie on clay. Like, I've always thought it should be a surface he goes well on.
Yeah, you'd think so, wouldn't you? Again, it doesn't come to it. It's not just game style with clay; it's how much time you've spent on it, whether you were brought up on it, and whether you move naturally on it. Cam's a great mover around the tennis court, but I don't think he's spent loads of time on clay, or he has. It's not even loads of time. It's whether it was the only thing that you played on when you were young, like most of the Spanish and Argentinians and that kind of Latin players come from, or even a lot of the Europeans come from. That's why they can move so well. So it's not really just game style. Game style wise, you'd think, yeah, it absolutely should be a really good surface for him. But yeah, it's a good win. I mean, other than it's one of those, isn't it? It's obviously brilliant that he's beaten Alcaraz. Other than that, the run to the final was pretty uninteresting, wasn't it? In terms of who he beat.
I mean, yeah, and obviously it's his second final of the week, and even throughout those 9 matches, if I list the names, it's Facundo Diaz Acosta, Thomas Echeverry, Juan Pablo Varillas, Alcaraz, and then Juan Manuel Cherundolo, who's the wrong Cherundolo, Thiago Monteiro, Hugo Dellien, and Bernabé Zapata Morales, and then Alcaraz again. So it's not.
I mean, all of those players are not guaranteed into ATP 250s. They're those players. All of those players, as it currently stands, will be splitting between challengers and any 250s that they can get in.
And I think that's actually the real shame about Rio, is that Rio is a 500 and it got really slagged off for having a rubbish draw. But the reality is that South America is a massive tennis market, and it absolutely should get greater prominence. But it's got this silly little clay court swing that basically no one plays. Cam was basically the only non-South American or Spanish player there.
I can tell you why a lot of the players don't like playing it. It's nothing to do with the tournament. It's that it's so difficult to get from Rio to Acapulco. Apparently, it's a 22-hour journey.
Jesus.
Just to get there, and that's the easiest. That's what numerous players have told me that over the last 2 years. There's no other way of doing it.
That's crazy.
So it's why they don't, unless, obviously some players have to do it because they're just trying to get in, as we've just spoken. They're going to play whatever they can get in. But by choice, if you have choice to do it and you've got the money and the ranking points where you don't need to do it, you're probably going to do one or the other. And if you're going to do one or the other, you wouldn't just do a random clay court.
No, you go and do the Middle Eastern hard court and then do Acapulco as your pre-IW. But anyway, I think I've said before, I think we should have a Masters in South America, and it probably should be in Rio. I don't know when you would do that, but George Belshaw's got a very big document on the region tennis calendar, I know for a fact. But what I was going to ask you, George, is another listener question from Wazza, Ian Warren on Twitter. He says, can we consider Cam Norrie a contender yet for Paris in May?
Okay,
so in a word, no, but please expand.
Look, I've still got the same feeling I do have about Cam. I think he does, honestly. I know we're saying we put it in the category of a Djokovic hamstring injury, but Alcaraz was fairly comfortable in this match before getting treatment on. I do think he actually probably does win that without the issue. Always hard to say exactly how bad it is, but it did seem to kind of have an impact, even if he did improve in the final set. I still just can't get my head to the point where I'm believing Norrie's going to be beating the Alcarazes, Djokovic's. Even we'll see where Nadal is at the French Open of this world. Tsitsipas against Zverev in those biggest matches over best of 5 sets. And I've seen a few people saying Norrie's not really had the respect or the praise he's earned for what he's done in some quarters. And in some ways, that's true. If you probably ask your average sport fan, what do they think of Cam Norrie, that they might realistically say, I don't know who that is, or couldn't pick which sport it is. And it's always a bit of a strange world. Who gets the respect they deserve in British sport? It can just be a little bit random, to be honest. But he's done brilliantly well, and yet the next step he wants to take is by far the hardest one, and it's the one I really, really struggle to see him making, even as well as I think he's doing. What he has shown, and I think this is his second title on clay, is that he is an all-court player now. He did what at Wimbledon last year, got to the semis there. He's always been a good hard-court player. And and he's someone who the draw can open up for, and he might walk through that door. Unfortunately for him, this year, I suspect that door's going to be fairly nailed shut by Mr. Alcaraz and Mr. Djokovic, because I think they're going to really be taking chunks out of each other if we're lucky. And then obviously lobbing Nadal into the mix of the French is never going to be straightforward either. So yeah, not for me in terms of my contender, but he's in that bracket below where if something goes wrong for all the top guys, he's more than capable of stepping through the door.
Yeah, you're right, George. He has now won 2 titles on clay. It's his 5th career title to go with Los Cabos, Indian Wells, Delray Beach, Lyon, and now Rio de Janeiro. All good holiday destinations, I would suggest. I wonder if maybe Cam Norrie should start playing the holiday schedule, where he only picks places that you might go on honeymoon. Maybe Lyon aside. I don't know about Lyon, but Delray Beach, Indian Wells, maybe not Indian Wells either, actually. I don't know, maybe this doesn't hold as much water. Maybe there's more to Cam Norrie's schedule than that. I don't know. Sorry, George.
I was just going to say on his schedule, I mean, we've questioned a little bit the value of these, but if you get to a final and win a title, that's a decent number of points and probably makes it comfortably worth the trip in the end. So you have to say that from a perspective of someone trying to nail his place in the top 10, it wasn't the worst scheduling decision in the world. And yeah, regardless of how injured Alcaraz was or not, it's a pretty uplifting defeat of the world number 2 to give him that extra confidence. So yeah, I have to say it's been a worthwhile fortnight for him out there.
Speaking of schedule, I think we need to talk about something not really related to this, that Benoit Paire is in real danger of not making the Benoit Paire swing, because he's only ranked 207 in the world, only a few weeks out from the old Miami into Monte Carlo swing. So, we may have to rename it.
a big match for him coming up at the Wacko Challenger this week, which is a great name.
It's actually Waco, George. No.
I'm sticking with Wacko. If Paire's there, Wacko's definitely more appropriate.
Yeah. I'm sure he'll be inspired to stay around Waco, Texas for the duration of that tournament.
I mean, presumably Benoit Paire's main interest is in the Waco Baco. Or in George's terminology, the wacky backy. It feels like, I don't even know if that's legal in Texas yet. Maybe not. It's played on what looks like, is it hard green hard courts? Maybe very weird color.
I've not seen it yet. Luke's there this week, actually.
Oh yeah. Well, we should mention, Calvin, what an easy segue that was. That Luke Johnson is a challenger doubles title winner again, or first time? No,
it's his first win. Yeah,
brilliant. Where was he?
It was in Rome, Georgia. Georgia in America obviously loves naming their cities after European cities.
Yeah.
So Rome, Georgia is pretty near to Athens, Georgia.
I see. Okay.
So yeah, pretty easy semi and final actually. Well, they had 2 tough first round, second round. They won 10-7 and 11-9, I think, in tie breaks. And then I think when they won 11-9, Henry sent a message to me and Luke saying he doesn't think I'd have managed another close one.
Yeah, it should be noted. Probably people won't necessarily know this because we don't talk about it a lot. But of the entire team in Cash and Patton, for example, I think I'm right in saying, Calvin, you take defeat worse than anyone.
I don't. No, I don't think I take it worse than the lads. It does get me down, but I actually. It depends the nature of the defeat, and it's the same with all the with Henry and Jules and Luke and Sam who he's playing with now. I find it more. I take the ones I find more that the close ones if they've been the better team, and kind of got the double scoring system is brutal. With no sudden death deuce and a champions tiebreak, you can genuinely be the best team for about 85% of the match, and find yourself losing. And we've had a couple of those. And equally, you can be the worst team for 85% of the match and end up winning. And the worst ones are when you think we've actually been very, very good there and we're out of the tournament early because of a couple of freak situations. So, but they're much more stress-free. Luke won his semi 6-2, 6-1 and the final 6-2, 6-2. So they're much more stress-free when that happens.
And Luke just plays doubles now, does he?
Yeah, he had a knee injury at the start of last year, and it basically led to we had to make a call on whether it was just singles or just doubles. And I think he's made the right call because he's gone up. I think he's now about 158. I think
Exactly,
so that's
158.
right, and that's 300 places in the last since he came back from injury, which I think was June. And because of that, he doesn't have anything to defend until June. So
great.
Yeah.
Flying. Might even get you Coach of the Year this year, Calvin. You never know.
Didn't get me Yorkshire Coach of the Year last year. So
You were highly commended, I saw, though.
Yeah.
So let's
Yeah, I
not
was.
take that away from you, eh?
But yeah, so he's in Waco, Texas this week with Benoit Paire.
But not playing with Benoit Paire.
Not playing with Benoit Paire now.
Okay. Do you think Benoit Paire would be a good doubles partner?
Luke's played against him actually, and he had again. That was one of those matches they were just talking about. 'Cause Benoit Paire had zero interest in the match for about 85% of it, and then played probably about 4 of the best shots I've ever seen. He hit a lob. Luke speaks about this regularly. He hit a backhand lob from the service line over Luke's head, and it landed on the other service line. And it basically defied the laws of gravity. But Benoit Paire, for all we give him stick, is a magician on his backhand, and it was really one of the best shots I've ever seen.
Is he? He must. Well, he's certainly the only player on tour now who runs around to hit his backhand. But is there anyone else who used to do that?
I can't remember many in the men's game. Arantxa Sanchez Vicario used to do it a lot in the women's game.
Is that right?
Yeah. But can't remember many in the men's. We come back to this debate. Does anyone actually have a better backhand than forehand? Benoit Paire is one. Richard Gasquet is another.
Jamie Murray.
Yeah, but I don't know. Jamie, I think he's the best volleyer in the game, still singles or doubles, but I don't think that's necessarily because his backhand is great. Because his forehand's not.
Very good. Let's not get ourselves in trouble, shall we, with valued contacts. Right, let's move on, because Iga Świątek very nearly won another title. I thought we were seeing the beginning of another Iga streak, but she was downed by Barbora Krejcikova in the final in Dubai. She beat Leylah Fernandez 1-1. She beat Ludmila Samsonova 1-love. She beat Coco Gauff 4-2, which by Gauff standards against Świątek is an improvement. But then was beaten by Krejcikova 4-2 in the final. George, do you want to talk about Barbora Krejcikova first, or do you want to talk about the car crash that is the Świątek Gauff head-to-head?
I think let's start with Krejcikova. We've not spoken about her for a while. This was a great week, a really, really good week. If you look at the list of players she's beaten, Kasatkina, Kvitova, Sabalenka, Pegula, and then Świątek. I mean, that is a who's who of the top 5 at the minute. I mean, it's really, really impressive stuff. And I think it's an important result because this was someone who was legitimately playing incredibly, incredibly well and pushing the very best at the top of the game when they won that French Open. Then they've had a really hard time with injury beyond that. And it felt like they might have just missed their window of their career where they were having their best years. And, you know, are we going to see them come back to that? And I think there's a sign here that we probably could. And I think that's really good news because, again, she falls into that category, obviously by virtue of beating Świątek this week, but just more generally of someone I think does have the tools to mix it with the very best. And that includes Świątek. So, yeah, I think this was a really important result again for the women's game. And while I don't want Świątek to be vulnerable to the point that she loses that momentum of being like a world star, it's important she has players against her who make it good, interesting rivalries. And in Rybakina, Sabalenka, and Krejcikova, there's 3 players really there at the moment who it feels like can go toe-to-toe with her, even if I'd still have Świątek as the slight favourite. And that probably segues into Gauff because that's the great thing missing from her at the minute is that I just don't see that rivalry getting much closer, even if she maybe won a couple more games than usual.
Just a point of order. Outside of Grand Slams and WTA finals and things, the last non-Krejcikova player to beat Iga Świątek was Madison Keys in August last year. Needless to say, 500s, 250s and 1000s, Świątek doesn't want to draw Barbora Krejcikova, it would seem. I think it's interesting. I think there's a weird era. I mean, we know there's a weird era coming in WTA. It's already here. And there was a good meme on tennis Twitter week being like people complaining about women's tennis because Iga Swiatek wins too many matches. Also, people complaining about Iga Swiatek because she loses too many easier matches. It's like, well, you've got to decide what you want, and it's true. We would like somewhere in the middle, I think, is the reality. But I think we're going to see a weird era where we're going to have this combination of young, talented players who haven't got the tools mentally to deal with the top game yet. And then I think you're going to have this also group of older players in their late 20s who have maybe been late bloomers or taken a while to kind of develop those mental tools. And you're going to see, I think, these quite interesting matchups where there's a duality to the tour. And I think Barbora Krejcikova can be, the kind of leader of that group of players in their late 20s who, and she's pretty even-handed mentally. I think she was in tears on court at the French Open last year because she wasn't fit. She shouldn't have played. Her elbow was nowhere near ready. She lost to Diane Parry, I think, on Chatrier in a bit of a kind of, a rabble-rousing clash in front of a passionate French crowd. But other than that, she's won Grand Slam. She's been the world. She's not currently the world number one doubles player, but she's been world number one doubles player. She's kind of been there, done that, and I think that's quite valuable in the women's game at the moment where there are lots of quite inexperienced and, I hesitate to use the word fragile, but, mentally lacking women who seem not to be able to deal with the rigours of the late stages of Grand Slams. There are plenty of those in the men's game as well, by the way. Cough, cough, Alexander Zverev. But I just think there's this kind of weird double thing going on. Calvin, Iga Swiatek 6-4, 6-2 over Coco Gauff in the semi-final. That is 12 sets in a row for Swiatek against Gauff. I mean, surely this matchup, they're going to play each other like 30 times in their career if they both, play until they're 32 or 33. Surely this can't go on. Eventually something will change.
Well, you'd think so, but I don't see what it is at the minute. I mean, it's not even a rivalry at the minute, is it? It's so entirely one-sided. And you really wonder unless... I mean, Gauff has to improve her forehand. It's just not... It doesn't do enough against Swiatek. She moves great. She defends great. First serve's good. But outside of that, Swiatek's just completely got a number. She knows she can't attack her off her forehand. And until that changes, but Gauff's kind of getting to that age. I don't think it's impossible, but she's kind of get to that age. I know she's still really young, but she's going to get to the age soon where you tend to not see improvement in shots so much at a great percentage. You might get something 2 or 3% better, but I don't think Gauff's forehand being 2 or 3% better really makes much difference in that matchup. But still, while she's still young now, in the next, I'd say 18 months, there's a chance that she can make her forehand 10, 12% better. And if you can do that, then you've got a matchup. But if she doesn't do that, I don't think she's going to fulfill her potential.
At what stage, being Gauff and being someone who, I mean, let's be honest, has been heavily, heavily touted to be the big leader of the women's game from a very young age, which brings its own pressures. At what age do you think she gets to where she's not fulfilled that at slams or wherever, is there a danger from that point that she collapses? Does she have to do this in the next 18 months? And is this like such a crucial time in her career now to actually make that happen? Or can she do it as Krejcikova at 27? It just feels so much easier for Krejcikova to kind of come in as a later Grand Slam champion, even if she was probably only 25 when she actually won the French, because there was no noise around her. But for someone like Gauff, who has had all this noise since... I heard of Gauff when she was like 11. Everyone's known about her on the tour for a long time, and 15 at Wimbledon. She's been a big star. It's got to be a lot of pressure.
I think they're two different things, though, George. I think when I say that she's going to improve that forehand in terms of that window, I think that's coming quicker than actually winning it. But just she won't necessarily win a slam as soon as she makes that improvement, if she makes that improvement. I think with tennis players, though, I think with athletes in general, but tennis players in particular, I kind of think by the time that you're 24, that is what you're going to be then. You get a lot of players who maintain that level for a long time, but I don't know many players who have gone up a level after that, or in other ways changed their kind of behaviors and this kind of thing, and that kind of is what you're gonna be, I think, at that age. So she's still got a long time to go on that, but I do think that in terms of technical window of improvement, to the extent where it sticks together and it knits, I think she has to improve her forehand in the next 18 months.
Sorry, George, I didn't know you wanted to come in on that. No, good. You did.
Well, I think it's just more. I'm thinking about the history of the women's game and some of the players who kind of have made that breakthrough so early, and actually how early their careers have petered out in many ways. It is slightly different to Hingis in the sense that Hingis had won a lot of slams when she was young, but I think the hype around Gauff has been kind of similar, even though she's not actually done it, and there does feel like there is a big backdrop of pressure. I do just really wonder, I know technical side or not, mentally, if she can't get over the line by like 21, whether she ever will. It just feels very make or break to me the next 18 months, and I'm really not seeing the improvement I was expecting to have seen by this stage that I was so sure would come. And I think she's got a great head on her shoulders. There's nothing about her. It's just more the backdrop she's competing against of expectation on herself.
I think that there, when we talk about those players though, George, that it also depends not just on the player's potential and ability, but also what's happening in the game and the whole landscape. So when Hingis broke through, it was kind of towards the end of Stefi Graf and Arantxa Sanchez Vicario and Monica Seles dominating the game. So there was a bit of a hole there. Whereas when Gauff's coming through 16, 17, 18, there's a lot of quality players who are not much older than her and in their prime. And I think that may be why it feels like she's not fulfilling the potential. Whereas I actually think she's followed quite a decent model into where she is. It's just she has this problem. She can't hit aggressive forehands.
It does. I am also aware that it sounds quite mental to be writing off a player as an 18-year-old, but I think it just shows like how highly we think of her, or at least thought of her. I remember seeing ridiculous articles, which we called out as ridiculous at the time, at Wimbledon when she was coming through at 15.
Are you specifically thinking about Sue Barker?
But that's a mad thing to write about a 15-year-old.
What did she say? She said she was going to win 30.
She said she'll pass Serena's total and Margaret Court, that she thinks she'll go through it. She may well do that. She still has the time on her side, but it has gone from someone you're just so adamant is going to win so many Grand Slam singles titles to someone who's like, I'm starting to doubt if she can even do the one, which seems mental for an 18-year-old. So yeah, maybe I'm being too grumpy on her today.
Right, when we come back and George has had a chance to iron out some of his grumps, we'll talk about Novak Djokovic and some sort of record he's broken. Now, we talked about this last week on Tennis Unfiltered with me, James Gray of iNews.co.uk and the iNewspaper. Calvin Betton and George Belshot are here too. We talked about the fact that Novak Djokovic, because he was already guaranteed to do so, would go past Stefi Graf's 377 weeks total as world number one. He is now the all-time, all-gender, undisputed champion of the world in terms of weeks spent at number one, which, the more I think about it, the more is a slightly insane metric for which to measure anything. But anyway, that was before he'd even stepped on court in Dubai this week, where he is making his return since the Australian Open. He said, "I've managed to achieve many fantastic achievements through my career. I'm flattered, obviously extremely, extremely proud and happy for this achievement." There was another cake, this time with 378 on it. Someone made him I don't know where these cakes keep coming from. The Serbian press pack, a big bakers or something, I'm not sure. But anyway, he is now the all-time world number one. George, do you have anything to say this week that you didn't have to say last week about him?
Well, on the cake point, they'll probably be doing another one in 22 weeks, presumably, when he hits 400. It feels like that'll be the next landmark for him to do.
I mean, Alcaraz is not far off him.
Yeah,
Alcaraz is only 200 points behind him. Effectively 201 because he wins the tiebreaker.
And assuming Novak might not get out to Indian Wells and Miami, which seems to be the case at the moment.
I have a question on that subject coming up, George. But
I'll leave it there then. But yeah, I mean, look, it's obviously
Alcaraz defended points though, isn't he?
Yeah,
Miami.
He won Miami, didn't he?
Yeah.
But yeah, it is a phenomenal achievement. I think it is just a really interesting time for where he goes now and how ludicrous this gets, because I've had for a long time him down to pass Margaret Court, so I'm kind of he's fulfilling my legacy of him. That I think I asked him that question around Slam 16, so I've been ahead of the grain on that one. But we've heard lots of chest bumping from Ivanisevic and co before, where they're saying he can go to 30. There is going to be that question of whether his body comes down, and there's going to be that question of how good Alcaraz is going to be to stop him. Now, I don't think it'll be easy. I do think he'll go past 24, maybe 25, and both those records are going to be pretty bloody but tough to beat. But I'm sure people said that about Stefi Graf 27 years ago, that no one would ever go past this, and here we are. So there's always someone in the future.
It's amazing, actually. Stefi Graf's records. I mean, I don't really remember Stefi Graf playing for obvious reasons. Far too young and sprightly. But it is amazing. Quite a lot of her records have stood the test of time. And I don't feel like... I mean, Calvin, as our resident member of the past, I don't feel like anyone ever put Stefi Graf in the GOAT conversation.
Oh, she
Calvin
100% is, yeah. She's the best female player. Yeah,
but people don't. People don't put her in the conversation.
I think that's because of hype, though. She was a better tennis. She was the best female tennis player that's ever played. She's better than Serena Williams. Like there's no question about it in my eyes. That if they'd have played each other at their prime, pound for pound, adapted, that Stefi Graf would have won more times than Serena Williams did. Right. She was just she had a huge serve, a huge forehand. By 12,000% the best slice backhand that any female's ever had.
12,000.
Maybe I've been very specific on that. Maybe Martina Navratilova had a good one. She ended the era of maybe the best era of women's tennis in terms of Navratilova and Chris Evert and all that kind of thing. She was completely dominant. And to be fair, as what Monica Seles was also brilliant. If you look at Monica Seles' record before the horrendous thing that happened in Germany, it's ludicrous what she was doing at a young age. Mm-hmm. When we talk about young players coming through, I think that you never know what's going to happen and that kind of thing. But if she followed the rate that she was on, she would have comfortably beaten Margaret Court. And then Stefi was right there with her. But yeah, I mean, if she's not in the debate, I think again this comes down to this sort of generation thing of the GOAT and that kind of thing. The game's changed, I think, in terms of what we consider that what makes people the greatest of all time. I mean, we never really used to have the debates about greatest of all time, but again, this is why I think this number one record isn't, for me, it's not hugely relevant, because the game's changed in terms of what people play and how regularly they play on the tour and that kind of thing, and who else is around. That I think you can't compare across eras. I don't think.
It just struck me that her name never comes up. George, carry on.
I was gonna say the number one thing to me, I almost think holds more weight to some degree than the Grand Slam one, in the sense that we've got added importance on the Grand Slams now to the point where players are really prioritizing them over other events that maybe was less comparable over eras. But I think it's a fairly obvious metric from once the one ranking was introduced in whatever it was, the 70s, that everyone would want to be the world number one player, and that is something that you'd like to be the best in the world, and that doesn't feel like that controversial a thing that would really have been affected by the eras to me.
I think it's more just in terms of like how relevant it was. We watched the Guillermo Vilas documentary where the rankings were just an absolute mess. They just seemed to be done by some bloke with a notepad when he felt like doing it every few weeks. And then people, wasn't it even something like people had to ring up the results? Like they had to tell him what they'd won.
It's brilliant.
But I also think the thing about Stefi Graf, going back to it, is that she basically crossed 3 generations at or close to their prime. She had the Martina Navratilova was still very, very good when Stefi came through when she was young. Then she had the generation of Seles, Sanchez Vicario, Capriati, all those kind of girls. Then she had the generation of Martina Hingis and the Williams sisters, the early stages of that, and was winning in all three generations, all three very good eras across her time. But yeah, and I think as well though, George, like if you look at tennis in the 1980s, it was just a different type of tour then in terms of who was playing what. Like McEnroe basically had the best year of all time in 1984, but barely played any tennis in 83 or 85. It was just kind of like when they felt like playing, they'd go and play a little bit.
Like Nick Kyrgios.
Kind of, but these people actually won things, and not, when I say McEnroe had the best year of all time, he won a lot, and then he also won, I think, 8 slams as well, as opposed to Nick Kyrgios, who thinks he's done all of those despite having one final in which he was given a walkover in the semi.
Indeed. Nick Kyrgios, news people may have missed today, he's pulled out of Indian Wells and Miami. He had hoped to come back from knee surgery in order to play Indian Wells, but that looks like he's not going to go to the US this spring and is instead going to, potentially play the European clay, because he has hinted he might do that. But George's face tells me that all he expects is that Nick Kyrgios will sit it out until the grass. We await with interest. Now, I've got a question, George. I hinted at it earlier. It's from Nikos Biggs Kyropoulos, who sent us 2 questions the other week, and they were such big questions that I wanted to break them up. So here's his second question. Recent Novak vaccine discussion. I agree that it seems sort of odd and pointless that he's requesting vaccine exemption for the US. Just an editor's note. He did a press conference last week where he says he didn't have any news and he was just waiting news on that exemption. Nikos says, but more importantly, their requirement is beyond odd and pointless now. As a reminder, the whole premise of vaccine requirements was based on the vaccine supposedly preventing individuals spreading COVID to one another. Take issue with that. But that has turned out to be a total fantasy and wishful thinking. So wasn't Novak right all along? It confuses me that people are still telling him to just shut up and get the vaccine when it doesn't stop him at all from getting a virus he's already had twice and been fine, while other vaccinated players have either still had very bad cases of COVID, e.g. Kontaveit, and some have even had very bad side effects from getting the vaccine. Shardy and Monfils, for example, have said as much. I'm just going to pick out some bits I don't agree with there. The whole premise of vaccine requirements is based on vaccines supposedly preventing individuals spreading COVID to one another. That's not true. The vaccine is supposed to stop you getting quite seriously ill, and it does that. Wasn't Novak right all along? I'll just disagree with that almost always, irrespective of the relevance of it. It confuses me that people are still telling him to just shut up and get the vaccine. Yes, I mean, now, at this point, I do think saying that is quite reductive and, puerile. But, yeah, he also could have just got it when everyone else got it because, basically it was the right thing to do and everyone agrees that it was the right thing to do. Jeremy Shardy, I have repeatedly quizzed him about his vaccine injury and he is reluctant to call it a vaccine injury. So make of that what you will, although I know that he has said otherwise in other places. Does anyone else have any other answers for Nikos? Obviously Calvin does, yes.
No, it's more just sort of some thoughts on it. I mean, I kind of get where he's coming from now. We've kind of felt like we've moved on from it and it's a strange sort of situation to be in. I know when I went to America a couple of weeks ago that they're still very stringent about getting vaccine passports and that kind of thing off you, but kind of feels like the world's moved on from it to a degree. I do know that, from the other side of it, though, there are still countries that you have to have vaccines for other stuff before they'll let you in.
Yeah.
I know countries in Africa, I think it's yellow fever, you've got to have, and that kind of thing. So I guess it's no different from that in that degree, but I do. There is part of me that finds it a bit strange that we're still talking about COVID vaccines. I mean, it's one of those. I'll always just get it done because why wouldn't you? But I don't get why we're really now forcing people to try and have them in some. It's more just. I wish they wouldn't do that just because it'd stop people talking about it. Because they're just real bores, aren't they? The people who are still talking about vaccines.
Talking about the minuscule elevated risk of myocarditis, from which almost everyone who gets it recovers without even being very ill. Matt Letitia et al. George, you got something to say?
I think, there's a few funny things in this Djokovic case as a whole, isn't it? I mean, it's the fact he went over to play there in the height of the pandemic. It's just always quite a funny misnomer in this whole conversation that he actually played there in 2020.
Yeah,
and then hasn't been able to go since. I mean, that ended up being quite a humorous disaster for another reason. But yeah, that always just kind of sticks out. I think the thing with this one especially is that the fact they've got the date to remove the requirement as well just feels a bit like arbitrary now. So I can kind of get it from that perspective,
that date, isn't it?
Yeah. So we're talking kind of a matter of weeks, really.
On that, does Novak not realise, or I'm fairly sure Novak's pretty poorly advised. Like, my experience of people who advise Novak Djokovic has led me to this point. I'm not just guessing. But at what point did they all sit in a meeting and go, you know what would be a really good PR move? Is like applying for another vaccine exemption that you're definitely not going to get? That'll go down really well. And the thing is, Tommy Haas will definitely have been in his ear going, no, you should definitely ask for it. Because, it's zero loss for Tommy Haas. On the off chance the American government intervene and give him the exemption, Tommy Haas has got Novak Djokovic at his tournaments. And if not, no one's going to blame him for it. And, I just don't understand how anyone thought it was a good look to ask for this exemption.
Yeah, and to call a press conference where you're just saying there's no update, it's all very odd. Yeah.
Well, I spoke to Sasha Osmo, who is a Serbian journalist who covers Novak pretty much, a lot. And I said, is anything going to come before this press conference? Because my boss was hassling me about it. And he said, well, no, he pretty much does one every time he's in Belgrade for an extended period of time. So I don't think he called it to sort of say, the update is there is no update. But, yeah, Calvin.
I wonder what he puts as his reason for the exemption. You think there
just
would have
don't
to be
want one?
Yeah. There'd have to be some sort of
previously,
logic.
Yeah, the whole point in Australia was that he had the recently recovered from the virus exemption. Yeah, George is making a face. But at least he had a reason, however tenuous you might have thought it was. I don't know. Anyway, I'm delighted that we're talking about vaccines and Novak Djokovic again. This is exciting.
Yeah, I'd love to know the number of exemptions they've granted on a more general basis.
Can you imagine?
I can't imagine it's many.
I don't even know what the reasons are at this point, but I did try and get in touch with the Serbian ambassador to the US about it. But
on a serious note, I guess he could apply to it on what we've just spoke about. Going, look, he's a professional tennis player. These are big tournaments, and they're lifting the requirement maybe 2 weeks after or something. But whereas he can't, he has to go there to work, but he can't do that work 2 weeks later.
No, exactly. It's not like he can postpone the meeting and just turn up 2 weeks later.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's an argument to be had, but it has no legal grounding. He's just basically throwing himself on the mercy of basically Joe Biden. Essentially, that's who he's asking here.
Yeah,
that's my understanding of it. Anyway, let's move on, shall we? And I've got a really good segue, unless, George, you've got a really good point.
I don't. That's fine.
And how smooth is this segue? I pointed out it twice now. Speaking of dubious vaccination stories, Camilla Giorgi won a title this week. The Merida Open in Akron. Not hugely remarkable for any real reason, other than that she beat Sloane Stephens 6-love, 6-love. Which slightly makes a mockery because Sloane Stephens has a new coach, I believe, of quite high profile. Francis Roig is her new coach. Francisca Roig, I should say, who formerly coached Rafa Nadal. So needless to say, that relationship's going well because that's an absolute stinker of a result. But unless anyone has anything serious to say about Camilla Giorgi winning that title, I'm going to move on and point out that Hubert Hurkacz maintained his reputation as a serious indoor player by winning a title in Marseille, beating Luca Riedi, Mikael Ymer, Alexander Bublik, Benjamin Bonzi. Again, I don't think that needs much more saying other than what we've already said. I have more questions, Calvin. This, again, was been in the inbox for a couple of weeks, and I'm afraid I've ignored it. It's from confused club player Laura in Washington, D.C. Welcome to the podcast, Laura. Calvin, why do we spend so much time training to achieve shape in inverted commas and rotations in topspin in inverted commas, but then hear so much celebratory commentary lately during pro matches that he really flattens it out and hits such a flat ball to explain big wins? Is the old Eastern grip the new Western grip?
I don't think no one's had a full Western grip for some time, so I think that would be a bit strange. Look, no, I mean, I don't think anyone's had a full Western since the 90s.
For people who don't know what a full Western and a full Eastern grip is, and I know this is difficult to explain over an audio medium, but basically I've always understood it is that if your hand is really turned around towards you, that is a what?
That's a Western.
Right, okay. So Rafa Nadal has a really Western grip?
No, he doesn't have a really. He has a semi-Western.
Right, okay.
But most players have semi-Westerns now, like
As my partner well knows, I often confuse semi and full.
Oh, come on. This is really lowering the tone here. No, most players have a variation of a tinkering of a semi-Western grip. There were a few players in the 90s who had Western grips. Alberto Berasategui was probably the most extreme. He made French Open final, and he used to play with he used to hit his backhand and forehand on the same side of the racket. He basically played with a backhand grip and hit his forehand with that. If anyone wants to see
table tennis, right?
Yeah, it's a really unique forehand he used to hit, which is kind of like a flick. It was apparently there's a sport in Spain called, I think it's Palata.
Yeah, Palata.
That they play. Yeah, and he was very good at that when he was a kid, and he basically brought in the same grip and played tennis with it. And he was a top 10 player for a good few years. He was a very good player. But he had one. Then most of the Spanish players did. He lost in the final of the French Open to Sergi Bruguera, who also had a Western grip. And just it allows you to hit huge amounts of topspin. But the problem is if you play somebody who can hit the ball hard and flat, you get no time on the ball at all. So it sort of developed into a semi-Western, and most players play with a variation of a semi-Western grip now. There aren't many who play with an Eastern grip.
What's the advantage of the Eastern grip?
You can hit it flatter, but you won't get any spin on it. It's basically is a continental or an Eastern grip is just going to make you hit the ball flat and hard. But again, you're not getting any. If you look back into the kind of 60s and 70s, most players played with Eastern grips there. But in terms of like why do we always coach shape, it's kind of like a few reasons. You do need it. It's about having sort of dynamism in the shots that you want to hit. It also makes coaches seem to be like they're bringing like some kind of spaceship down that no one's ever seen before when you teach players topspin for the first time. It seems like a great invention where it's just really easy to do once you can do it. But yeah, you won't get anywhere unless you can hit topspin. Even the players that we talk about hitting the ball really flat, they're hitting some degree of topspin. It might be less, not full Nadal type thing, but yeah, I disagree that there's not much variation in grips outside of the range of what a semi-Western is.
Is there an argument? I mean, is there any argument or weight to the conversation about we celebrate flat hitters more, or that flat hitters break through more now? I mean, the conditions are less kind of spin receptive for the most part. That's true.
I don't know if it's that. I mean, the women's game, the ball is just hit really flat. They don't hit with much shape, and that's been the case for probably for 10 years now. That most of the players, there are some. I mean, like we're just talking about Gauff. Gauff hits too much topspin on her forehand. Swiatek hits quite a lot of shape.
A lot of spin.
Yeah.
I was going to say,
yeah, but most of the I'm a bit wrong there saying that most of them hit it flat. The Eastern European girls hit the ball very flat.
Of which there are a lot at the top of the game at the moment.
Yeah, and then like such as Madison Keys hits the ball very flat. Sloane Stephens doesn't. Sloane Stephens hits with a lot more shape and that kind of thing, as does Swiatek. Krejcikova, to be fair, has a lot of variation and that kind of thing. But the two girls that we saw in the final of the Australian Open hit the ball very flat, very hard. There's not much variation. They're both going to come out and hit the ball hard and flat and see who wins.
I should pull you up for calling female tennis players girls, Calvin, because it's seen as patronising.
Yes.
I know.
Apologies.
No, it's a bad habit. We all do it. But all we can do is notice it and try and do better. Let's move on. I've got more questions. George, this might be one for you. I think it's from Buy and Sold, who is becoming a regular questioner, which is always fun. Buy and Sold says, I think Katie McAnally has the tools to go top 10. As she gets older, the mental strength will come, which kind of connects with something we were saying earlier. Am I as off base as George's obsession with the Austrian? Best not to excite him by saying the name.
I think there's nothing wrong than a healthy support of wanting someone to do well. So from that perspective, I wish Katie McNally all the best. For you, I mean, she definitely can be top 10 in the perspective that she's on the women's tour at the minute, and there will be a lot of opportunities to climb to the top 10.
Top 10's a long way, though.
It is a long way, but it's, there's a lot of movement. A lot of players who've been in that top 10 over the last 5 years are nowhere near it now. It is quite a sliding scale, which, hasn't always been the case. I mean, look, she's not someone I watch all the time and think this is someone I think is going to be competing for slams and good. But she started out quite young, had some good results. She's still young. She's actually, when I saw this question on Twitter, she was younger than I thought she was still. Because when I saw the question, I was thinking, she's probably about 23 now. It feels like she's been around for quite a long time. But so she's still got a few, plenty of years in the bank. And kind of the opposite of Gauff, really, in the sense that I don't think people will be looking at Katie McNally and thinking she definitely should be top 10. She definitely has all this pressure on her. So, we spoke about that trajectory of where players are hitting their careers. She's definitely probably more on that path of, in her late 20s, might have the opportunity where she gets that extra maturity. Why not?
Calvin?
I think it's interesting that she stopped playing doubles with Coco Gauff. Because I know they were really good friends as well, and I wondered whether that was, being that Gauff has continued playing doubles. I don't know whether Katie McNally has. That's what I was just trying to check, but I can't find it. I didn't know whether she was sort of making a decision to concentrate more on her singles, which some players do.
Yeah, I'm just trying to find that as well. I mean, there hasn't been a fallout, I can tell you that from the very quick Google. But I can't tell you. She is still playing doubles, Katie McNally. She was playing with Diane Parry this week, and in fact, they won the title in Akron. So she's still playing.
Maybe
doubles.
Maybe they just thought that they'd split up and play with some others. I know they're really close friends, so I don't think.
I wonder if it's a schedule thing to an extent, because she now plays
perhaps
with Pegula, and McNally is obviously, I think, only about 90 odd in the world, so we'll be wanting to play different tournaments from a singles perspective, so it may well just be one of those practical things that you know a lot more about than I do, Calvin. But just a guess from me. Right.
Yeah, I think I'll just touch on that, James. That I think that's what, when we spoke about schedule a lot over the last couple of weeks, I think that's something that people who don't know the circuit so well don't understand, that you don't always get to choose your tournaments and your schedule. It basically, that there's about 4 or 5 tournaments, 3, 4, 5 tournaments on every week, and you're going to go to the ones that you could get in for most players. It's difficult to actually schedule, right, we're going here. I know just with the lads who I coach and doubles, it's basically week to week. We'll enter everything and see which one we get in.
Yeah.
And we're going to have to go there.
Yeah, fair enough. And also, once you commit to going to, I don't know, Rio, or if you go earlier in that swing, if you commit to going to Buenos Aires, you're like, well, I'm not then going to go and play Dubai. Like, you're like, okay, well, we're in South America now, and probably got to try and play those tournaments down there. And that kind of locks you into a certain pathway. Right, there's one person we haven't spoken about this week who we probably should have mentioned, which is Emma Raducanu, who pulled out of her tournament this week in Texas because she's got tonsillitis, which, I mean, is just another kind of... It's just another one on the list of Raducanu withdrawals. I don't think, George, we can really criticise her for a soft withdrawal. She had tonsillitis. She's really not been very well. She didn't fly home because you're not really supposed to fly when you're ill anyway, and it wouldn't have been very good for her to do so. So she's actually stayed out there in the States to recover, and then we'll hopefully head to Indian Wells reasonably early. I think pretty disappointed because she had headed to Austin pretty early to try and get ready for that tournament. I mean, it is just awful luck, isn't it? And I'm sure there'll be people taking the piss, but it's not great, is it, George?
No, it's not. I mean, I've never had tonsillitis, so I can't really.
Me neither, for the record. Calvin, you tonsil free?
No, I've still got my tonsils.
Okay.
There you go. So, yeah, I can't really comment on how physically challenging it is from a personal perspective. But I know people who've had it before and have not been very well. So that is very
no
unfortunate.
analysis required. I reckon. It's something that happens, but it does mean that she misses out on another opportunity to pick up some points, which she does kind of need now. She could end up dropping out of the top 100.
I think, my main reflection on this is when was the last time we just had a conversation about her tennis? It feels like an awfully long time. There's always something going wrong. That's not to blame her for this, but if you look at her last few tournaments, I mean, there was a retirement against Ostapenko in Korea in September. She lost a match to Kasatkina in her first.
She just lost that match in Ostrava. Just lost it.
Retired in New Zealand, was a big injury doubt going into the Australian Open, where she was then beaten by Gauff and not played since. I mean, that's not really a great. What's September? That's 6 months, isn't it? Really, I know the season's kind of ends across that time, but she's someone who desperate. I think the one thing we want her to do is get a lot of matches under her belt, whether that be from winning lots of matches and having some great weeks, or actually just plugging away and getting that that match hardening. And
I think the wild cards really hurt her at this point. I think a wild card into Indian Wells is great, but is it the best thing for her at the moment? Does she from a tennis perspective, Calvin, is it valuable for her to go in unseeded to an Indian Wells draw, probably get a seed in the first round, probably on the balance of probabilities lose, although it might well be 60-40, or is she better off going, I don't even know what tournament is the alternative to that, but playing a 1-2-5, winning 5 matches in a row, remembering what that's like?
Yeah, you could definitely argue that. I'd probably still do Indian Wells if I was her. It's tough to turn down, especially because the women's game, almost every match is on a knife edge. So why, if you're capable of winning matches at that level, why wouldn't you? That's the way that you'd look at it. The only reason you'd drop down is if you thought, I'm just not winning matches at this level anymore, or at the minute. But she'll know where she's at, and her coach will. I think it could be. I imagine it's pretty frustrating for the new coach, all this sort of thing, because you wonder how much work has really been done. We haven't seen her in a while, and it's absolutely not her fault, or couldn't be helped that she's had the injury, then tonsillitis. But you'd think, right, she's had a bit of time since the Aussie Open. They've probably been, with that normally means being getting down to some good work. Whereas it's kind of I don't know how much she will have been on court, and that must be pretty frustrating for the new coach and the fitness trainer.
Yeah,
and for her as well.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to read too much into it, but I was speaking to someone last autumn who told me this, and I have seen a couple of pictures of evidence of it, that there is a bit of a physical transformation going on, and that she does look stronger. Now that happens at various stages of life, and you have to remember that she's still young. She just turned 20. She's still a teenager. She's turned 20 now, right? And that happens at various different periods of your life. You have different physical transformations, and it is something she's actively trying to do. So I would be positive on that front, but I mean it's all kind of academic until you win 3 tennis matches in a row, right? Which I can't quite remember the last time. With respect that she did that. I mean, Seoul actually she won 3 in a row in Seoul. She hasn't won 4 in a row since winning the US Open. That's absolutely certain. I think that brings us to the end of all of our appointed stops on this journey around the tennis world that we take once a week. George, usually you like to extend things and take us into overtime, but I'm rather hoping that your 2-day hangover might save us from that.
Well, James, there was one thing you had mentioned off the official order of play, but was worth remarking, that you were talking about an extension of break point, which feels like this could be break point or match point, as it's the end of the podcast. And
this is where we learn that Calvin isn't a big point player. He just plays at the same level on match point as he does the rest of the time, which is 95% winners. Yes, Simon Briggs, the esteemed Telegraph tennis correspondent. Well, actually, that's not his job title. I think he's senior writer or something. But he was pointing out on Twitter that he has been hearing that there's a second series of Breakpoint confirmed. I know that, and I've seen in the flesh, in fact, that they have been filming just in case they got recommissioned. Interesting to do it, given that there weren't massive viewing figures on the first 5 episodes, and no one apart from production staff have seen the second 5 episodes of the first series. Calvin, were you surprised to see it potentially get recommissioned?
Yeah, so early. I think mainly because I've spoke to a few people today since that news came out and asked them, and people I know who watch a lot of Netflix and a lot of different things on Netflix, and asked them if they've watched it, and they haven't. And I asked sort of 3 or 4 people, and I know it's to a degree it's a small sample size, but at the same time, these were the people I know. Like I say, they watch a lot of stuff, so they haven't. And I asked them why, and they just weren't really interested in it. And I really do think that if they're gonna do another series, they need to start thinking about a narrative. They need to start telling a story throughout the series instead of these sort of one-off focuses on one player or 2 players, and then we don't really see. I know they keep cropping up again, but we want to see an actual story of a narrative through a series, like you get on the Formula One, which I haven't watched. But also, I think its main problem is that the sport isn't accessible enough on TV or streaming for enough players, for enough people to get interested in it. I mean, I actually timed it the other day when Murray was playing. For me from turning on my television to getting Andy Murray on, it was 2.5 minutes, which doesn't seem a great deal, but it ain't half frustrating when you're trying to get through something. It was for my dad, actually. It was at my mum and dad's, and my dad said, "Can you put Murray on?" And I put it on, and it's just ridiculous. Whereas I could just say to him, "Can you put Murray on?" I go, "Yeah, press 401," and it's on.
Mm. And I was actually channel hopping between Gogglebox, which my partner and I were watching, and Murray in the ad breaks, and I spent most of the ad break getting to Murray, rather than just hopping in and out, which is what you'd much rather do. George, I apologise.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think the narrative point's really important because you actually do potentially have a really, really great season to build that narrative with the kind of Djokovic, Alcaraz potential duplex at the top. There's interesting stories to tell about the guy going for everything and the guy who feels like the next guy who can go for everything. And then, issue is they ain't going to get Djokovic involved in this. He's got his own documentary going on. And, I think this is where tennis just permanently shoots itself in the foot. That there's so many kind of complex rights and, the idea that someone's going to be following Djokovic around all season who doesn't have a vested interest in making Novak Djokovic look pretty perfect, as I'm sure his documentary, whenever that ends up materializing, will do. There's too much control in the hands of players, and often the best sporting documentaries, the ones I've enjoyed most, have been stuff like Sunderland, where you just you pick that team to follow all season. Sunderland Till I Die, I think it's called. And even if you just follow one player all season, you capture everything because it's like, oh my word, this is going so bad. And everyone was so optimistic that it's so bad. Whereas this is a bit like, oh, I've just watched the Matteo Berrettini one. And it's like, okay, the most interesting thing about this is how messy him and Isla and Tom Lanovich are. Put your clothes away. But I didn't really get much of it kind of beyond that. And the way they storytell with the matches is quite poor in terms of really giving you a sense of how an actual tennis match works. 1 second it'll show a point that says 4-1, and then they'll show a point that Berrettini's won when it was 4-1 up, and then he's suddenly won the 7-6. You don't really get the flavour, which probably again speaks into the issue we've droned on about before about how bad tennis highlights packages are. But yeah, I hope there's a bit more of a stronger narrative through it, as Calvin says, because that definitely will help, and it will also help people understand that tennis doesn't happen just 4 times a year.
It also, as we've touched on before as well, the top of the game is not where the stories are and the narratives are. For one reason or another, apart from anything else, they've all got PR people and management. They wouldn't allow the stories to ever get interesting. It just wouldn't happen. They'll cover everything up, and you get whitewash. And I know that the Kyrgios one is particularly a bit of a whitewash, isn't it? That you never get that. Whereas there is interesting stories in tennis. You go lower down, like I just said about the guys who don't know where they're playing week in, week out. Those are interesting conversations to people, I think. Where you're putting your entries in. Where are we going to go next week? Are we in Dubai? Are we going to Rio? and that kind of thing, rushing to get a flight. The doubles tour, where you've got the narrative of the relationship between different players and that kind of thing. The Challenger Tour is just, it's in more interesting venues. I think we've kind of focused on trying to do it with the top of the game, and I don't think that will ever be interesting.
The other thing they've got working against them now, of course, is that everyone who's featured in this thing seems to not do very well in the tournaments they're featured in. So knowing how superstitious some in tennis are, I think you'll get a bit more worried.
It's too far. It's too far in the past as well. You know, Aleksandar Lamovic and Matteo Berrettini have not been going out for about 9 months now. you know, it's, and everyone knows
it by Wimbledon, I think.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
that's kind of inevitable. Like Drive to Survive does that like a year on, and you know, golf. The golf one came out last week or the week before, full swing, and that actually has been really successful. It's been in the top 10 on a number of different countries, which Breakpoint never managed, and we always compare tennis and golf.
But for what it's worth, I can see why they broke up. I enjoyed Berrettini telling her off for wanting to get up at 7:45 one day.
Really bad. It's just been like, what? He's like, what? I have to sleep. You go do it somewhere else. I have to sleep. There's a business centre. Go down to the business centre. And then someone dug out the interview that she did, and she did it from like the garden of the hotel at 7:45 in the morning because Matteo Berrettini like desperately couldn't wake up for half an hour while his missus did a call in the other half of the room. Yeah, exactly, George. It's easy to see why they broke up. Anyway, we wait with interest to see exactly whether Briggs' information is right. It usually is, so who am I to doubt him? Maybe he can come on the podcast and explain himself at some point if he deigns to grace us with his presence. But that's all we've got time for this week. We've rattled on quite long enough. My new premium Zoom account getting its money's worth. I've been James Gray of iNews.co.uk in the iNewspaper. That's Calvin Betton, the man from Yorkshire, and George Belshaw, the gravelly man with a hangover. Please do leave us a rating or a review wherever you get your podcasts. It means a great deal. Follow us on Twitter, Unfiltered Tennis, Instagram, Tennis Unfiltered Pod. I'm sure we're on Facebook as well. Someone has to be, but most importantly, please do come back.
All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Social Podcast Network.